Humans have been burning cannabis since our earliest relationship with it. Cave evidence shows that early humans would take whole cannabis plants and put them on small fires in caves and essentially hotbox the cave. And then they would have a mystical experience. And done with the right intentions, we still can. We love smoking cannabis because the lungs provide a speedy and efficient way to get cannabinoids into our blood and into our brain. That's why smoking comes on faster than any other method. Hell yes. There are at least two strong reasons to consider vaporizers, though. The first is that not everyone has lungs of steel, and the longer we smoke hot plant material and tar, the more impact our lungs take over the years. There are also folks who have other respiratory diseases like COPD, where cannabis smoking can be used as a medicine, but smoking anything at all is impossible. For asthmatics like myself and other folks with respiratory issues, vaporizers create a fun and effective method for us to be able to use cannabis. The second strong reason to consider vaporizers is how much improved the taste can be. To be able to enjoy cannabis flower without all the burning plant material getting in the way of the terpene profile is a great thing. Many of us love the intense flavors of dab oil without the plant as contaminant. Vaping flowers is similar in that we are inhaling the resin of the flower without taking in all the burnt plant particulate and tar that gets in the way of true flavor. You've likely heard me talk about cannabis from an asthmatic perspective before, both here on the podcast and on the Shaping Fire YouTube channel as well. On Shaping Fire episode 36 on cannabis and breathing with Robert Littman, we discussed how best to inhale cannabis to preserve your lungs, how to incorporate cannabis into asthma and COPD care, and we addressed the long-time myth that holding your hits gets you higher. Spoiler, it's hypoxia, not THC that makes you feel higher. Today's episode is a blend of cannabis medicine ideas and cannabis engineering ideas. If you want to learn about cannabis health, cultivation, and technique efficiently and with good cheer, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. We'll send you new podcast episodes as they come out, delivered right to your inbox, along with commentary on a couple of the most important news items from the week and videos too. Don't rely on social media to let you know when a new episode is published. Sign up for the updates to make sure you don't miss an episode. Also, we are giving away very cool prizes to folks who are signed up to receive the newsletter. There's nothing else you need to do to win except receive that newsletter. So go to shapingfire.com to sign up for the newsletter this week and be entered into this month's and all future newsletter prize drawings. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and I'm your host, Shango Los. My guest today is aerospace engineer Mark Lewis. Mark is a lifelong engineer of systems, machines, and organizations. He has been an aerospace engineer for Hughes Space and Communications in Los Angeles. Looking for new challenges, Mark joined the Peace Corps and went into the jungles of Fiji to teach science and help with revitalizing schools there. This experience profoundly shaped his views on the critical impact that education plays in society, which led him to commit 15 years to improving K-12 education and becoming the statewide policy director for STEM education in Oregon. Most recently, though, Mark Lewis is again an engineer and inventor of novel vaporization devices for cannabis products through his company, Pearl Labs. His award-winning designs have been honored by the 2022 Core 77 Design Awards and selected as the 2022 Best Designed Vaporizer by Kenigma. I discovered Mark through his first in product class vaporizer invention called the Neo. The Neo can be used with any pipe or bong or rig. Imagine lighting your cannabis with a lighter like we always have, turning it upside down, but instead that lighter gives off really intense radiant heat instead of flame. You just put his vape lighter over your flower or oil and it vaporizes. There isn't anything like it on the market, and I love mine. But Mark is not here to talk about his company at all today. You know I don't do company, person, or product profiles on Shaping Fire. We do topics that you're interested in. So Mark is here as my science and engineering expert to break down the science and engineering behind modern vaporizers without talking about his own. During the first set today, we will discuss why cannabis enthusiasts vape. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages and the differences between burning cannabis flowers and oil versus vaporizing them. The second set is devoted to engineering. We will look at the three families of vaporizer technology that make up nearly all the vaporizers available, and then compare and contrast them. We will look at them twice, once for flower and once for oil. It's a big set with a lot of details. You will pretty much understand everything you need to know about vapes as a toker after that. The third set is short, and we focus specifically on the boiling point myth that conflates evaporation and boiling. They are not the same, and it really impacts your experience with vaporizers. Welcome to Shaping Fire, Mark.
So happy to be here, Shango. Thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent. All right, let's dive right into it. You know, a lot of people feel kind of motivated and nearly religious about their vaporizers once they start using them. But, you know, a lot of people don't understand the why of vaporizers yet, because in reality, vaporizers aren't used a ton in the scene yet. People are still mostly, you know, lighting their cannabis with fire. And, you know, humans have been burning cannabis with fire for thousands of years to like great effect. So let's start by talking about the advantages cannabis enthusiasts are after when they start using a vape device instead of combustion. Will you tell us a little bit about those advantages?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, there's the health aspect, right? So anytime you are actually combusting, as the people on the West Coast and now the East Coast know, the detrimental effects of the wildfires on their lungs and their eyes, you know, smoke carries a lot of harmful products in it, the ash, the soot, the tars. And so first and foremost, the process of vaporization removes a lot of those, or almost all of those detrimental compounds from what you're inhaling. So by and large, they are healthier than smoking. They're also more efficacious. There's been some research studies about vaporizing flower versus smoking it, and how much is bioavailable, how much of the medicinals and the active ingredients get absorbed into your bloodstream. It's much higher than smoking. So there's the bioavailability of the compounds, which is also very effective. And then I think the smell is one of the things that, you know, well, personally, I love the smell of, you know, cannabis being combusted, but it's a little powerful for some, and it lingers because the smoke actually gets onto your clothes or into your room. So the smell of vaporizers tends to be quite a bit more discreet. Yeah, and then if you're talking about the vape pens, the cartridges, then those are very, very discreet and very convenient for people to use.
It's really been a benefit to cannabis portable vaporizers that they became popular the same time as nicotine vaporizers, because people are so used to people busting out nicotine vaporizers that I can pull out my travel vaporizer anywhere. And unless they're close enough to smell the exhale, people around me have no idea. So that's been a real, advantage for all of us who, attend events or even just walk along the street.
Yeah, that's a real boon for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the advantage also to people who've got pre-existing conditions like me.
Sure.
I people who listen to this show often know that I have very severe asthma, and because I have a respiratory condition, I have to be gentle on my lungs, and I still smoke joints, but like I know after I've smoked a joint, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And when I go to events like, Emerald Cup or something where, you got to puff tough the whole weekend, I really feel that for several days afterwards. And for many people with asthma or COPD, if we want to inhale our cannabis, vaporizers are a fantastic option because it's so less harsh on our lungs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's missing all those ash particles that lodge into your lungs. Yeah, and certainly the heavier tars and oils are also removed from that, so it's much easier on your lungs.
When people talk about like the unhealthy aspects of smoking. Almost everybody just goes to cancer, right? But it's interesting to hear you delineate that, the bits of smoke and the particles in the smoke and the tars and all of those things on their own have their own kind of impacts, even if they don't eventually lead to cancer.
Yeah, for sure. And I try to really avoid, criticizing people who smoke, because I don't think there should be any sort of judgment, and there's so much social stigma around smoking these days that I don't think that's the reason why not to smoke. I think it's really, from a health and taste and the bioavailability for me, it's a much more complex experience than smoking.
Yeah. And we'll get to it later, but it's also a different high too. So
it is completely. Yeah.
But we also need to be fair, right? Because even though vapes are so improved for people's lungs, it's not without its challenges, right? It's still heated air. We're still inhaling superheated air.
Yeah, by the time compared to smoke, which you can reach temperatures you're inhaling, right at the embers, you're talking over 1,000 degrees at the ember. But if you're smoking a joint, you're looking at 500-600 degrees in your mouth. And with vaporizers, you're well down into the hundreds, into the low hundreds, 180, 200 degrees at the most, I would think, by the time it enters your mouth. I have not put a thermocouple in my mouth to measure that vapor, but I don't experience that lung irritation from heat.
All right. So then maybe I'm misattributing, I talk about vaporizers a lot with just like regular heads, right? Not usually with scientists like you. And it's not uncommon for somebody to say, oh my gosh, I've been hitting my vape so much that my lungs feel crispy. All right. So do you have any suggestion on what is the attribute of a vaporizer that might make my lungs feel crispy, especially if it's a flower vape, like, my old school packs or something?
Yeah, to make your lungs feel crispy, we're going to get into, I think, some of the things that are happening at a micro level. But if you're really toasting your herb strongly, you probably are changing the nature of the terpenes and the cannabinoids into other thicker oils that can reside then in your lungs and have that heavy feel to it. And then certainly with cartridge-based vaporizers, the carrier oils make a big difference. And we think we know the background around the EVALI scare a couple of years ago with the vitamin E acetate. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what was happening, right? Is the carrier oils were impacting your lung experience.
I think it's also fair, if we're going to be talking about the downsides of vaping generally, to talk about what a plastic, battery waste, and trash from packaging nightmare cartridges are. It's such a drag, and for years, I'm not sure if cartridges have solved this yet, but for years I would have a little Ziploc with, partially finished vape cartridges that just had all of this waste in there, and I wasn't even going to be able to get the oil out anymore, and it just seemed so wasteful, like doob tubes.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess we also have to be careful about the terpenes for either oil vapes or for even, I guess that would be the only kind, because people don't really add terps to flower, I hope. But, there really aren't a lot of studies on what it means to vape the amount of terpenes that are common in an oil. And, terpenes are by their very nature caustic, and we won't know until it's too late if it's actually unhealthy to do that. And, I'm sure you've come across that a lot as you have done your research.
Yeah, well, I never recommend that people add pure terpenes to anything that they're smoking or vaporizing because they are solvents, right? So if you think about, limonene, it's a wonderful solvent. It helps clean your hands. It can get stickers off. It can do all sorts of wonderful things. But when you experience terpenes, and we've, you grow up smelling flowers, right, your entire life, and the history of humanity, we've had a very rich interaction with terpenes in a very beneficial way. So in very small amounts, terpenes are phenomenal, right? So keeping as close to nature as possible is kind of my rule.
Right on. So let's talk about that, right? Because it's interesting because if we're talking this idea of keeping it as close to nature, and if we humans are a thing of nature, and we are a part of nature, and we are not excluded from nature, the way that we have been using this natural plant with cannabis for thousands of years have been, by fire, going into the, pulling out the plant and going into the cave and putting it on the fire and filling up the cave with smoke and then learning to, craft little pipes when we could control the fire better. And then of course, eventually developing hash. So we're able to store it better and not burn and combust as much of the plant material. And so many of us love that profound good taste of combusting, quality herb that has been grown and cured properly. And then yet at the same time, as we start to use vaporizers, now I am enjoying the same plant in an entirely different way, that's giving me a different experience of the terpenes, and we'll talk more about the science aspects of it later on. But it's an entirely different taste where there's almost a needed transition period when somebody goes from flower to vaporizing because it is so different. Would you describe the difference in taste experience, I guess, between combusting and vaporizing the same flower?
Wow. That's not hard. Well, I would concur, first and foremost, with the experience of and rituals of consuming a nice joint or your pipe or your bong. I think we have learned to manage our experiences with those devices and with combusting by we get a certain feedback that helps us manage our experience. And when you're shifting over to, for example, flower vaporization, the feedback that you're getting is much, much different. Your lungs are not experiencing that intense hypoxia, the constriction and the lack of oxygen. Instead, you're taking a deep breath of vapor that is rich in the cannabinoids as well as the terpenoids, and it feels gentler, but that can be deceptive as well because, as I mentioned earlier, it can get you higher. So you have to learn to manage your feedback differently with vaporizers than you do with our traditional modes of consumption.
I like that use of the word feedback because I would say the number one complaint that I've heard from people who are just starting using non-cartridge vaporizers is that, like, did I get a hit? Because right. the hits with a low temp handheld vaporizer. I mean, heck, even some of the desktop ones, it feels, the inhale feels so much thinner. And it's weird because so many people who are developing vaporizers, and then because we people keep asking for them, we want vaporizers that will give us clouds, right?
Right.
And clouds are an aesthetic experience of both feeling a good hit, like feedback you were talking about, and also the satisfaction of exhaling and seeing this cloud, right? which traditionally is part of the satisfaction from taking a bong rip, right?
Totally.
So would you talk a little bit about why why that hit is thinner? And I guess you kind of already addressed that because there's not as much particulate in there. I guess I would like you to talk to more like, are we missing anything from that thinner feeling hit?
I don't think so from my perspective. I think you, again, when you have smoke and it has the ash and particulates and stuff in there, your lungs constrict, and so you get that intensity, a feeling of being a little more intense because your lungs are responding to these things that are contaminants from its perspective. Whereas when you're vaporizing flower, then your lungs are not feeling that intensity of invasion. You're getting things that it recognizes, and they're binding to the alveoli and then being moved into your bloodstream. And so that's one aspect of it. To the clouds, I think that is a learned feedback that we are judging our experience based on these clouds. But at the same time, your lungs can only absorb so many compounds at a time. So anything that you're exhaling with a vaporizer, you're exhaling those active ingredients. If you're seeing a cloud, that's kind of wasted byproduct because your lungs haven't taken them up and delivered them to your bloodstream. So that's another way of thinking about it. And at the same time, there's always been a bit of theater in cannabis, right? And we enjoy that as part of the social aspects.
Yeah, that's really true. All right, so I've got two sides of this coin. And so I'm going to give you the coin, and then you can approach it however you want. All right. On one side of the coin, we're taking these thinner hits, I'll say, and you say sometimes they'll actually get us higher, right? But then on the other side of that coin are many people, when they first start vaping, they feel like one hit is not as satisfying for them and they don't get as high. And so they're all like, well, I need to take 2 hits or 3 hits of my flower vaporizer to get the same feedback as I would from my bong. But then also some days you just go and you have, one hit of the vaporizer and you've got this really speedy, bright sativa kind of high, even potentially from, a non-equatorial plant, right? That's something that's more myrcene rich. So what I'd like you to kind of just speak to is this idea of the hits being thinner. And so we have to take more of them. And yet the misnomer in that we actually can get wicked high, wicked fast from vaporizers too. How as somebody who studies the technology and the user experience, how do you kind of resolve those? Because they're all true, right?
Yeah, they're all true. Yeah. So for the same, let's put some boundaries on where we go with this.
Fair enough. That sounds good.
So for the same amount of herb, I will claim, and I think research backs me up on this, that you will get higher if you completely vaporize the same amount of herb as smoking. But it's over, as you mentioned, over far more hits, I guess. Maybe double or triple the hits. So that's one aspect of it. Yeah, and yet paradoxically, it's more effective. So where I'm actually going is when you first load a fresh bowl with a vaporizer, we haven't talked about decarbing it yet. And decarboxylation doesn't take place immediately like it does with fire. And so your early pulls are going to evaporate some of the THCA without necessarily converting it to THC. And so, yes, your first couple of pulls are probably going to feel a little thinner and maybe not affect you, but that third, fourth, fifth, sixth are going to be fully decarbed and a lot more intense.
That's so obvious, but I have never thought of that before. That's really interesting. So I hear that two different ways. Number one, I like it because if my first hits are going to be offering me more THCA, CBGA, CBDA, right, than my latter hits, that means I'm going to get all these acid forms of the plant, which are healthy and good for me.
Yep.
But the longer it stays in the vaporization chamber, the heating chamber, the cannabinoids will be changing to the non-acid versions. And so I'm getting perhaps a wider array of that. And for the listeners who are not familiar with decarboxylation, essentially what you need to do to make THC an intoxicant is that you have to heat it to a certain point that changes it from an acid to a non-acid. And when we normally smoke bowls or smoke joints, there's so much fire in that joint that it happens instantly. But as Mark was talking about earlier, we're not burning at 1,000 degrees. We're talking about more like a couple hundred. And so that process doesn't happen instantly.
Right.
So then the second thing I'm thinking, not only am I happy about getting all these acid forms of the cannabinoids, on the flip side, if I'm dollar conscious, that's going to really annoy the hell out of me, because I could see that as wasting cannabinoids, because if I'm money conscious and I'm trying to get, the most bang for my buck, I want to get high, I actually will be disappointed that I'm smoking THCA like the first hit or two. So it really is different consumer to consumer.
Yeah, I think I have never experienced disappointment with flower vaporization. I'll just say, Shango.
Mm-hmm.
And you're through vaporization, and again, when we get into the mechanics of different kinds of modes of vaporization, we can see how they'll behave differently. But often, unlike with fire, when you're combusting, you've got a lot of side stream, you've got a lot of wastage. And with many vaporizers, certainly the more reputable ones, you're not actually heating the cannabis when you're not inhaling. And so your bowl goes a lot longer. And from an efficiency standpoint, the overall amount of product that you are going to be purchasing in a month to manage your health and well-being is likely to drop significantly.
I see. So it's a much more complex algorithm that I was giving credit to. And also, as far as like the wastage goes, it's always noticed how much smaller the heating compartments are on vaporizers as they are like from your hand blown glass slide that can take, a thumb sized gram nug in it. Right. And then you go over to your vape and it's asking you to take like, 1/7 of that, or 1/10 of that, and then grind it and then put it in there. It usually looks like a paucity. I think that's the right use of that word. It looks like such a small amount of weed, but then still gets you high. And so it's confusing. It's less weed, it gets you high, but you need to take more hits, and you're getting a lot more THCA. But over time, you're wasting less. So it's actually budgetary smart.
Yes.
Damn.
I think you nailed it.
Oh man. All right. So All right, so let's wrap this up. So I wanted to start this first set with conversations about the why of it kind of generally, but no doubt I know I have invited an engineer here, so we're gonna go and take a commercial break, and then when we come back, we're gonna get into a more serious discussion about the engineering behind the popular varieties of vapes, and go through some oil vaping solutions and flower vaping solutions, and really get into the mechanics of it. So you are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is aerospace engineer Mark Lewis. And without these advertisers, Shaping Fire wouldn't happen. So please support them and let them know you heard of them on Shaping Fire. You've heard me talk about the award-winning cannabis seeds that come from the analytical breeding program of Seth and Eric Crawford, who founded Oregon CBD Seeds. In fact, Seth was a guest on Shaping Fire in 2020 to talk about triploid genetics. Seth and Eric are now releasing high THC seeds for home growers and farms as Grow the Revolution Seeds at gtrseeds.com. Their high THC seeds are extraordinary in that they will start to flower at 16 and a half hours of daylight instead of the typical 14 and a half hours of daylight. That means in most regions, your plants will start to flower outdoors in the middle of July instead of the middle of August, which means these photoperiod plants finish in September and not October, totally upending the photoperiod seed market. Seth and Eric took their prized early flowering CBG line and bred it to some of the most desired verified genetics out there, including Sour Diesel, Triangle Kush, Wedding Cake, Chem Dogs, Skittles, and others. These crosses all express powerful photoperiod terpene profiles and THC, giving you a great high. GTR Seeds has a new THCV line with plants like Double Durban and Gigantor that boast 1-to-1 THC to THCV, and people want that THCV. GTR seeds are very consistent, true-growing, inbred F1s from stabilized inbred parent lines. These seeds are nearly homogeneous, and the plants should all grow the same. There is only one phenotype in every pack, available as diploids and triploids. Seth and Eric's company is still family-owned, patient and employee-centric, and partially powered by their 2 acres of solar panels. Everyone can purchase these seeds and the entire catalog of Oregon CBD seeds at gtrseeds.com. Go to gtrseeds.com today and choose something revolutionary for your next indoor or outdoor run. As cannabis regulations become more demanding and consumers become more educated, it is increasingly important to avoid the use of chemical pesticides when cultivating cannabis. Beneficial insects have been used for decades by the greenhouse vegetable and ornamental plant industry, and today many cannabis cultivators are moving from sprays and chemicals to beneficial insects. Copert has the beneficial insects, mites and nematodes, microbials, sticky cards, and air distribution units you need to partner with nature to defend your garden. Whether you manage acres of canopy or have a simple grow tent in your home, Copert is ready to help answer your questions and help you transition away from chemical sprays towards clean and natural solutions. Since 1967, Copert has assisted growers in identifying pests and devising reliable solutions while providing healthy insects and mites that will protect your yield. Since the 1990s, Copert has been a leader in cannabis pest and disease control worldwide and have highly trained consultants to assist you in Canada and the United States from coast to coast. With their global network of grower support, Copert can help. Visit Copert.com, choose your country, and get detailed information. That's Copert, Koppert.com. For the most up-to-date cannabis-related biological control information, you can also check their Instagram at Copert Canada. You know getting away from pesticides is good for health and good for business, and Copert is ready to help. Visit Koppert.com today. Cannabis folks are innovators and problem solvers, and we like to make money. Have you developed a tool, technique, or plant that you want to protect and monetize? You'll likely want legal representation that is experienced, accessible, and shares your values. Plant and Planet Law represents a wide variety of clients who choose to respect the environment while pursuing their business goals. Have you invented a machine or gizmo that you're bringing to market? Did you discover a breakthrough environmentally friendly pesticide or fertilizer formulation that you're about to start selling? Have you bred a cannabis plant with attributes not found anywhere else? Attorney Dale Hunt and his Plant and Planet team have established genetic patents in over 30 countries. Working to help entrepreneurs, scientists throughout the life sciences, Plant and Planet represents environmentally positive clients in cannabis and other botanicals, fungi, water purification, clean energy, emulsions, and medical applications. Plant and Planet helps people protect what they've created. If you are an early stage company with an established idea and are in the process of fundraising, often the investors require intellectual property protections happen at the same time. Plant and Planet can be your sole representation, or they can integrate with your existing legal team and plug in their specialties. Plant and Planet is made of scientists, lawyers with a real passion for cannabis, inventions, and the environment. They have the scientific and legal depth to help you establish patent protections for your great idea. You don't have to go it alone. Friendly, qualified, and honorable legal representation is available to you. Contact Plant and Planet Law today to start the conversation. Email info@plantandplanet.com. That's Plant and Planet Law. Our clients make the planet better. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is aerospace engineer Mark Lewis. So during the first set, we talked about why we vape, what the cannabis enthusiast experience is, and some of the challenges and work-throughs for those. But we're going to get into more of the nitty-gritty of the engineering behind both flower and oil vaporizers now, both so that you can just be a little deeper on this very important aspect of the cannabis culture, but also this should help provide a bit of a shopping guide for you as you as you learn about the different types of vaporizers, and you can figure out what you might be interested in should you decide to pick one up. So Mark, there's a lot of different approaches designing vaporizers, and there are so many coming out on the market all the time now. And we're going to talk about flower vapes first, and then vaping oil second, because they really are like different things. So let's talk about flower vapes. So do flower vapes fall neatly into a few different categories so that we can kind of bunch them up and talk about them? Or is there so much for variability model to model that we have to take them one by one, God help us?
Well, not all vaporizers are created equal, for sure, Shango. And when it comes to flower vaporizers, there are two primary categories, and those are convection-based vaporizers and conduction-based vaporizers. Now, anyone who's stood around a campfire has also experienced radiant heat before, and that's, heat transfer at a distance, if you will, and some vaporizers might include that, and that is certainly an effect that impacts sort of the internal working of a vaporizer. To summarize, just briefly the differentiation between the two modes.
And honestly, I'm going to encourage you to not be necessarily that brief, right? We don't necessarily need to do a dissertation, but this conduction versus convection thing that I think that you're about to wade into, this is key, right? So take your time so that we can all pick up on this, because just the fact that conduction and convection are so similar immediately confuses people right out of the gates. And so take your time, because I think this is a chunky bit.
Sure. Okay. Well, in short, conduction is heat transfer through touch. Right. So if you are a conduction-based vaporizer has an oven, it has a chamber, either made of metal or ceramic, and you place your herb in that, and the vaporizer heats up that oven. And so your herb is being heated from the walls of that little oven, of that chamber, and that's conduction. So it's being heated largely by touch. A convection-based vaporizer is sort of like a convection oven or an air fryer. You're heating up the air, and then that is being transported or pulled or pushed through your herb, and that hot air then extracts or evaporates the various compounds.
So conduction is actually your flower touching the heating piece, and convection is somewhere up the chamber. The air is being heated, and then you're sucking that hot heat towards the flower, and the heat is touching the flower instead of the metal or the ceramic.
Right. The air is flowing through, the hot air is flowing through and evaporating the compounds, the volatile compounds.
Okay. And then the third kind was radiant, where there is some kind of device that's itself just hot, and I'm putting it in general proximity, but it's neither touching the flower nor far away.
Right.
Okay. So can you give us a little bit of explanation on the conduction convection timeline? Because, I know that generally speaking, people consider one better than the other, but I would like you to just kind of explain the beginning of vaporizers design, what was first, and then how they've kind of evolved. And while not everybody likes the same kind of vaporizers, kind of where the people are responding in the market.
Yeah, I think the earliest vaporizers that I'm aware of are certainly, they played around in the 70s with heat guns, and just delivering the hot air that evolved to some of the whip-based vaporizers, like the Vapor Brothers, the early boxes with
I still have my Vapor Brothers box, man.
Yeah, and Bert there, he's a wizard. He's one of the grandfathers of vaporizers. He's a really good guy, understands all of this. Those were largely convection based vaporizers, so they were heating the air and it was flowing through your herb. Now, when it started to move to more portable kind of devices, it's a lot easier to manufacture in small, compact designs to engineer a conduction-based vaporizer. So to heat up the oven, throw your herb in that oven, something on the market, some of the ones like the packs is largely a conduction-based vaporizer.
And so how we'll picture that is that all of these various vaporizers, where it's got some kind of little lid, and you put your flower in there, and it's actually touching it against steel or ceramic, and then you're putting the top back on. They all kind of fall in the same category, no matter what they look like.
There's a sizable portion, but there's others on the market that are hybrids and do a lot of the heating of the air. The Crafty and Mighty by Storz and Bickel, they will heat the air, but there's also a conduction component to their design. So some of the heat is transmitted up to the walls of the chamber as well. So they're both introducing hot air as well as conduction from the sides, and trying to then get an even vaporization of all the product.
That's a good point for me to not be over generalizing and make it look like these are really such separated solutions, because you're right. Like everybody is inventing and trying to find the technology blend that works best for their product, and so anybody who's going to buy one, make sure you understand the one that you want to get directly, and not just something very general that you read generally about conduction or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right. I interrupted you. Please continue.
Well, I was going to say, just to highlight some of the differences when you actually have a hot material touching your herb, you have a danger of burning it, right? Because they have to compensate by delivering a lot more thermal energy through the walls in order to have it then cook, if you will, the herb that's in the middle of the chamber. So you have a much higher likelihood of over roasting your herb and getting that kind of burnt popcorn taste that some people complain about.
I do not care for the toasty.
No. I'm a light roast kind of guy.
Light roast, there you go. So if you're going to get more of an opportunity of the toastiness with conduction, you would not get that with convection because the heated air is coming in contact with the entirety of your flower mass at the same time, right?
Correct. Well, it's impacting the wherever the inlet side is. It's getting a blast of the heated air. First, that particular part of the herb is going to get the heat blast first, but then it's going to be pulled through your herb. Now, in a convection-based vaporizer, you can also pump up the power so much that you do, over roast it as well. So if you're up at combustion level temperatures for that air, it will certainly combust on you. But most vaporizers try to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you would really need to have your temp really cranked up at that point.
You would have to have it cranked up, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to your timeline that you're giving us. You talked to us about the box vapes, and then the first, I'll say, real breakthrough, to the consumer market vape of the packs, and then things continue on to convention. So please pick it up.
Well, I think a lot of the things that you're seeing on the market now are variations of a very similar approach. A lot of vaporizers are trying to portray flexibility through incorporation of different apps, so that you can control the temperature settings, and we can talk about whether or not they can actually do that or not. Most vaporizers are able to. You can set a particular setting and vary those with an app or directly through the button control.
Let's go ahead and have that conversation now, because I was going to ask you that in two questions anyway. These temp controls, and I know we're kind of like talking about the entirety of the market, so that's not really fair, but generally speaking, are these temp controls to be believed? Because unless I'm paying a good penny for a vape and getting like a Stores and Bickle or something, I'm pretty suspicious of these temperatures that I'm being told that they're heating at for anything that I'm paying under $200 for.
Yeah, I think you're right to be suspicious on that for a couple of reasons. Some don't actually use a thermocouple, a sensor that feeds back the actual temperature. And then moreover, I think the biggest thing is, well, think about a regular oven. You heat it to 350 degrees, but as soon as you open the door to put your cookies in, then it drops a considerable amount. And the same with a vaporizer. So it might heat it to a steady state, but as soon as you start pulling cool air in, that's going to vary the actual temperature of the airflow and the vapor that you're experiencing. Now, the good side of the temperature settings that on a particular vaporizer is that you will probably get relative consistency from one session to another, regardless of whether it's actually true. So that can still be a very, very beneficial kind of attribute to a vaporizer, so that you can be able to dial in the experience that you want from one session to another.
Right on. I buy that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So even though on some of the lesser expensive vapes, the temps may not be accurate to the number that they say it is, but at least it's going to be same from session to session. So once you find out where you like it, it'll be able to hit that mark consistently.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that. So let's talk about the grinding part, right? So, historically, a lot of people don't grind flour for a bowl. Many people will grind flour to roll a joint, though my mentor hated grinders and believed it always had to be done by scissors. But I think that was because he was always collecting seeds, so I'm not sure about that. But when it comes to grinding, every book that you get with your vaporizer says to grind the flour so you get a more even experience. Will you speak to that?
Yeah. I really don't like grinders, but it's true. Well, there's pros and cons, let's just say.
Yeah, break it down. Tell us.
Let's break it down. When you actually grind your herb, you are changing the particle side and making some uniform consistency in the when you pack your material into your vaporizer. And so that can be very beneficial to get even flow, similar to grinding coffee, right? You can't make coffee with whole beans. You have to grind it. And for different coffee makers, you grind it to different sizes. So it's a similar analog for flower vaporizers too. Grinding will certainly give you that consistency of the pack, if you will, or the puck, as I call it, because it comes out as a puck once you've used it. But I don't really like what happens to my trichomes. I don't want to go chasing after keef and then reintroduce it to the bowl. So I prefer actually to chop my herb directly into the chamber or to the bowl.
When you say chop, do you mean like finger separation or scissors?
I actually just use fingers to pluck small, small size, and then I have a tiny little sharp knife that I poke it with and tease it around and get it to a fairly uniform consistency. So that's my method, but everybody has their own kind of method. But I like to keep my trichomes with the rest of my herb.
Yeah, and I guess some of that also depends on what kind of a grinder you're using, right? Because if you're not using the keef attachment, it stays with it. The part about the grinders that I haven't really cared for is the smearing of all the trichomes, and then like cleaning them off of the grinder. Back when I was younger, that seemed like a lot of waste.
Completely.
It still seems like a lot of waste, but I have plenty of weed now, unlike when I was younger.
Totally.
But for me, the main advantage of the grind is to get that nice, even pull, and to know that I am not wasting the trichomes that are on the interior of the little budlets, let's say, that are in there. Am I correct in my assumption that the hot air and the conductive walls of the oven, neither of those will vaporize a trichome that is caught on the interior of a dense bud little piece?
Yes, in general. It really depends on the size, right? Of what you're dealing with there. I would say that yes, it's more efficient to actually grind your herb and to be able to access those internal trichomes. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, this is clearly personal preference, right?
Right.
So you gave good reasons why you're on your side, and I did as well. And you and I all both have plenty of weed. But to somebody else whose decision matrix might be slightly different, well, I want them to be able to get the information they need too. Right?
Totally.
Yeah. I know lots of people who have opinions who I need more than just their opinion, because I want to kind of understand the whole area so I can make my opinion.
Right. What I tend to do, again, this is my personal preference, is, when you have those small nuggets, you are correct that the internal trichomes don't immediately, aren't accessible to the hot air. what I tend to do is open the chamber back up and crush it, and then release all of those things.
I see. Once you've hit it a couple times, then it's dry.
Then it's dried, and it will then fall apart readily, and then you've got your even distribution then of particles, and it's more efficient.
Right on. The next thing I was going to ask you was the recommendation that most of these companies have to stir. Yeah. And so, usually somewhere around, I don't know, hit 4 or 5, they say, oh, pop it open and give it a little stir. And oh my God, it just kills me how often I see somebody using a pen with ink on the end to do that. And I'm all like, you're not even thinking about what you're putting on your herb, dude. But it's way too common. But anyway, then they close it up and continue on. And, do you think that stirring is effective?
Yeah, definitely. Almost all vaporizers have, with the airflow going through, you're not going to get even heating of your herb. So stirring it just means you're moving the sort of the unspent particles around, moving the oils around so that they can be efficiently vaporized. So I strongly encourage stirring if you want to get the most out of your herb. If you're feeling kind of lazy and you have got an abundance of herb available, then whatever you want.
Right on. If you're feeling lazy or wealthy.
Right.
So at what point would you recommend the stirring? I usually stir when I taste the toast for the first time, but right. I also suspect that I'm one hit late at that point.
Yeah. It really is a personal preference. So you can stir every pull, which is a pain in the butt. Yeah. But every 3 or 4 pulls,
I've never tried every pull. I had that sounds like so much work, but I should do it for the experience for sure. So that I can weigh all this properly.
Yeah, I would never do it every pull.
We talked on the first set about how, cloud hits are different with vapes. And yet sometimes you do pull clouds and sometimes you do pull bigger, flavorful hits, even if there is no cloud. And, in my experience, whatever cloudness I'm going to get from a vaporizer is improved with stirring. What are your thoughts? Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah, and again, I think that once you're into pull 2 or 3, you've you have decarbed, you have warmed the bowl, you have removed any of the residual sort of moisture in the herb, and so it just becomes, the whole system becomes a lot more efficient, 3 or 4 pulls in, and so you are going to get more, bigger clouds more easily at that point.
All right. So, let's move on. Unless you've got anything else to say here, let's move on to oil vapes. Yeah.
Well, let me talk briefly about a couple of other things.
Excellent.
Here, one is that we haven't talked about sort of the exhaust. What happens to the vapor after it's moved through your herb, and frequently, another thing to look at in a vaporizer is how much accumulates, in that vapor pathway. Some vaporizers on the market, and I'm not going to call them out, but claim for an all glass pathway. Glass actually is a fairly conductive material. It tends to be cool, so we have this perception that we want to cool the vapor. Well, once we cool the vapor, you've got those oils that are then condensing in that pathway. And the way you can tell, sort of how efficient the vaporizer is how much gunk you have to clean out and how often. So another sort of buying decision is to look at, just how much, what happens to the vapor after it goes through the herb. Are you having to frequently clean it? Well, then that's not really, you're not getting the maximum benefit from your vapor. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to say that. And then one of the other sort of controversies or questions that are out there is how much do you pack in your chamber? How do you press it down? Do you crush it? How dense do you pack it in? And my take on this from a sort of aeronautics science kind of direction is that for convection based, so the ones that are using the hot air, for a convection based vaporizer, tamp it down. So press it down and compress it. It's similar to what you do with an espresso shot. You're removing any sort of easy channels for the air to flow past your herb rather than through it. And air will always find the path of least resistance. So if you have those channels and the larger buds in there, then it's going to flow past rather than through your herb. So definitely compress it down. And it creates what's known as back pressure, which is similar to a carb cap on a dab rig. It lowers the pressure right there at the herb, and it will vaporize more efficiently.
Wow, I'm really glad that you went back for that. Not only is that interesting, but I do it wrong. I noticed it earlier when you said, when you take the puck out of your vape, right?
Right.
And I'm like, man, I don't have pucks. It's just like, it just comes out as like slightly brown, ground up weed still, and in my head, I wanted to leave a little breathing room so that the hot air could easily be drawn through it. But now I understand from your analysis that I'm doing it exactly wrong, because by my leaving it somewhat loose in there, even though that does make it easier for the stirring step, that I'm allowing easy vapor paths that will be preferred by the physics of the inhalation, when really I want to press it down so that there's all these multitude of variety of paths that are being taken.
For a convection-based vaporizer.
Yeah,
for a conduction-based vaporizer, or like a Dynavap, which is the really innovative design, right?
Mm-hmm. I like
basically,
those.
Yeah, they replicate the notion of smoking. So it's it's a smoke-like experience, right? But they're largely a conduction-based, vaporizer in that regard. The metal heats up, right? For something like that, or the packs, which many people have, I would say a looser pack is probably better, because you're heating from the walls. So how does the heat then transfer? If it's really dense, the heat is not going to be transported through your herb, because your herb itself has low conductivity. Wood and plants, they don't conduct heat very well. Whereas then the air that's moving through there, you want it to circulate and the heat to then move into the center of that chamber. So for a conduction-based vaporizer, I would pack it a little more loosely.
It's interesting too, to hit on the Dynavap one more time. I have owned one, and the one I have, I've only ever used it with my butane torch, right? And that's an interesting experience, to hear the little crack sound and then know that it's time to take your hit. All that's very interesting. I'm not a super big fan of using the torches in general, though.
Right.
But then my buddy Michael, he came over, and he is like a total Dynavap like fanboy. Like he kind of is just like a vaporizing scientist. Desktop he until I met you, he pretty much knew more than anybody I knew about him. And so he got this desktop thing that Dynavap has got, where it's like you plug it in, and you can just kind of put the pipe into it, and it acts kind of like it transfers electric energy to it. And it's very convenient, like an e-nail is. And then you just take it out and you hit it, and it's so much more elegant. And it's interesting that it is a product that has multiple heating mechanisms, because really that's pretty uncommon to have multiple heating mechanisms for one vape system.
Yeah, I really am impressed with the sort of the engineering background of the Dynavap and what they're doing. I believe that's an induction-based heating sort of block that you drop it in, and so it uses induction to then heat it up to the perfect temperature. So I think that's pretty fantastic.
Excellent. All right. Are you ready to move on to oil now?
Sure.
All right. So as kind of like a bridge place, let's just give a little bit of a shout out to those flower vaporizers who really, really want to be oil vaporizers too. And so, they will have like little solutions like, I've got a little cup, and you can take your oil and put it in the cup and then drop it into the flower chamber, or we've got this, specialty screen or a sponge. You can put your oil in that, and then we'll put it into the flower vaporizer. And those can, people can definitely find effectiveness with those, but I think that across the board, it's really hard to make one vaporizer that's best for all solutions. And like if you're only going to buy one and you need one that does both, that's there are definitely some good solutions out there. But going all the way back to the original PAX like little cup that was in there. I got mine assuming that it was going to be an oil vape and a flower vape, but that little cup just, it didn't really work out over time.
Didn't really work, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on these vapes that try to straddle?
Well, I think that when it comes to vaporization of an oil, it's all about trying to maximize your surface area. And so when we're dealing with flower, it's great because the flower fibers wick the oils and distribute them across the fibers, and it's pretty easy. So one way of experiencing oils or concentrates would be to just drop it on or mix it in with your flower, and that can be a pretty effective way of using the flower vaporizers to experience oil. But then you've got to mix, and you're not getting that purity that a lot of people who dab are seeking from their extracts. And so I'm going to do a little bit on because I spent a couple of years trying to find a solution to this with oils. And most of the vaporizers, the flower vaporizers in the market, use a stainless steel kind of Brillo pad, if you will. It's just a bunch of stainless steel wire that's been compressed into a little, shaped puck or disc that then gets dropped into the chamber. The challenge with that is that metal will warm up and not reach the vaporization temperatures very readily. So while it's warming up, your thick oil or concentrate, your wax or shatter is going to start melting, and it's going to travel along those wires. And oftentimes before you reach the vaporization temperatures, it's going to start flowing into the rest of your unit, and you're going to get that gunk everywhere. So no, most that try to do both are not very effective.
How many of us have had that experience early in our toking career where we try to put a ball of bubble hash or something into our bong with a screen, and we're warming it up, and as we're warming it up, we're seeing it like slide down the slide on the glass, and you're like I only got one hit off of that, and now it's all it's all inside of the bong. Oh. That's
sad. Disappointing.
Yeah, it is very disappointing.
But it's similar. I mean, that's exactly what's happening inside the vaporizer, and then you end up having to clean it out. And that's no fun. Nobody likes doing dishes.
Yeah, very good point. All right, so let's talk more about like oil vaping solutions that are specifically for it. This really isn't going to be a long show on carts, right? But let's talk about just the idea behind the carts and how they function. But carts could be like their own show, So if you would just explain the mechanics of carts, that'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you have carts are a very interesting and efficient, right? They're very convenient. The oil basically is in the cartridge, and then there's a heating element. Oftentimes there's a wick or a wicking mechanism to make sure that the oil gets transferred to that heating element. or to a hot ceramic that then locally basically boils the oil locally. And so that then, that vapor then is transmitted and, through the mouthpiece and aerosolized. One thing I learned recently is that part of the design of many cartridges is actually to introduce an external, they have little air holes, and that is to make sure that the vapor is less dense, and that it coalesces back into an aerosol rather than staying in fine particulate form. And that fascinated me. Part of that is to increase sort of the cloud production, but also to make it a little easier on your lungs and to cool it a little bit before it enters your lungs.
Mm. As far, we're really going to focus on non-cart vapes, but since we're right here, I think that it's important for us to say, whatever your preference is in, what you want in your vape, like, I'm a big fan of hash rosin personally, but I certainly have got respected friends who like properly purged BHO for flavor. And, there's a wide range of what you can put in the vape. The only thing I want to be clear on is to know your source, because there is a lot of garbage that can be put in the vapes. And it was weird. In the early days, people didn't really know what was best to put in the vape. So people tried everything from, coconut oil to vegetable glycerin, all these different things. And God help us, we made it through. And so now we know mostly we don't want to be, adding non-cannabis constituents. But then the ones in the licensed market are often so expensive for lots of people that they tend to buy them cheaper in the unlicensed market. And then we're back to the problem of, oh God, what the hell's in it?
Right.
And so, whatever your oil preference, dear listener, know your source, because we don't want you to get, some kind of serious lung issue from using some sketchy stuff.
Right. And from a functionality perspective, you have to have something added to the cannabis oil or it won't flow well, right? So there's a degree of flow that enters into the design and requires something to kind of cut or thin the oil to make it function properly. Now, Go ahead.
Is that always the case though? Because I really thought that the big breakthrough in the last 18 months is people being able to press hash rosin at a viscosity that they can put them in these new vapes and not have to have any adulterant at all to it. And I thought that was true. Is that not accurate?
I don't know, Shango.
Okay, fair enough.
So, fair enough. I haven't seen those designs yet, and that's exciting if it is. One of the cautions that I would say for people with the cartridge-based vaporizers, because at least I experienced this, and that is that throat burn that often happens, and it's easy to think that that's temperature, but I don't believe that's what's really happening. Anytime that you drop, let's say, if you've done Chinese cooking or dropped, hot oil onto a really hot pan that's like red hot, right? You get you convert those oils fairly rapidly into other compounds that are thicker and are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons.
Well said.
They become worse. They become bad shit. Is really what happens there. So anytime you're really putting the oil in the presence of something that's super hot, it's going to alter the chemical structures of those compounds. And so that's what I believe the throat burn is due to. At least that's my armchair science background on that.
I'll take it. And also, damn, if that's true, that explains why so many people have turned away from cartridges and gone to some of these other solutions, like the Puffco Peak, which we're going to talk about in a second. But before we do, so do you consider an e-nail vaping or combustion?
I would say it's a form of vaporization. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it had to do with like the temp, because, certainly we do see smoke from it. Right. But we don't ever see fire. And so I was kind of this idea myself, because I've used an e-nail for years that at my lower temperatures is a vaporizer, but at higher temperatures, it's combustion. But that might be like the most non-science thing I've said today.
Well, if you're experiencing, again, you can alter the chemical composition without it being combustion. So at high temperatures, when you pass the smoke point of an oil, you start altering the chemical composition, and that can feel like combustion, right? It's a harsher effect. And so when your nail is super hot, largely it will lead to that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of movement to the cold start dabbing or low temperature dabbing, and e-nails have certainly helped that quite a bit, to dial in the temperatures more precisely.
Right on. So we're gonna let's talk about the Puffco Peak, which stands out as being, one of the most cherished instruments, in the oil community. It's convenience and the fact that you were talking about the surface area, right? And one of the great things is they've got these, their bowls are great and they're pretty evenly heated throughout it. And so you've got a lot of space at once that's in contact with the oil at the same time. And I also want to be clear that, Puffco is not like a sponsor or anything, other people like the Focus Carta, right? So like, I'm talking more about the design where it looks like a bong, and you've got this wide bowl, and then it's heated, and then when you put your concentrate on there, you're going to get a large vapor hit at once because of all the surface area. Do you like how I'm explaining the science behind that? Is that how you see it too?
Yeah. I have not had a ton of experience with the Puffco, but it's sexy AF, right? I mean, right. It is. Let's face it. It hits all the right notes, I think, for being a fantastic product, and and it can really deliver for those people who want that experience. So yeah, it's pretty revolutionary from an e-nail perspective.
And, they got a lot of crap over in the early years because there were some models that went out with some, failing components, which I guess they've figured out over the years, because I haven't heard people complain about that anymore. But have you ever seen the specialty Puffco Peak hand blown and made glass trophies that they use for Emerald Cup the last few years since they started sponsoring them?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, they're absolutely beautiful. I wish I could plug the artist who does such a great job on them, or maybe they change them from year to year. But anyway, if
that's great.
For those who like Puffcos and they also like ostentatious pieces, search for the Emerald Cup awards.
Yeah,
they look pretty
I've seen
good.
some great wood ones online where people are making some gorgeous wood pipes that then the Carta fits in, and yeah, those are gorgeous. So you can have that smoking like experience, but then enjoy your extracts.
So this whole family of pipes like the Puffco Peak and the Carta, these all would fall into the conduction category, right? Because that ceramic bowl that's being heated, and then we're putting our dab oil on it, that is a direct application of heat, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have anything else to say about that, like that type of design before we move forward?
No, I think that, well, I always have something to say, I suppose.
Go ahead, finish us off on this topic.
I think, again, look at the waste product, right? So what's left in the bowl when you're done? And that can tell you a little bit about clues to the chemistry that's happening during the process of vaporization. So when you're left with, dark, resiny substances, then you haven't completely vaporized them, and you may have altered the chemistry. Just like when in a cartridge that's near the end of life, the oil has changed from maybe a light honey to a really darker blend because you've altered the oils, and you're left with some of that heavier kind of compounds in there.
That's interesting how what is left, depending on what is left, can say something about your temperature choice, but it can also say something about what's in the oil.
True.
So other than the under combusted dark oil that you're talking about, what else might we find in remaining in the bowl that we would want to be aware of?
Well, you're not having any plant matter, so what you've got are largely just different oil compounds. When the changes happen to terpenes, and Dr. Strongen from Portland State University has done some interesting research on dabs and sort of the byproducts of conventional dabbing techniques. This doesn't apply to low temperature dabbing, but for high temperature dabs, there's there's a great word, pyrolytic, but literally means fire changed, and thermolytic is probably the more accurate thing. The oils then break down into those benzene rings and these other hydrocarbons that have been shown to be present in cigarette smokes and be cancer causing compounds. So I'm not saying that that's what is in there, but there is a likelihood of finding those kinds of compounds in that remaining
goo.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of the right thing. Yeah. It is goo. It's gunk. It's gross.
And it's a really good encouragement for us that when we do get a new vaporizer to really spend some time getting to know the different temperature points, so that we can, really find the right temperature for how we like to smoke, so that we're not having that much residue, and that we're not tempted to smoke it once it's become gunk. We want to heat it properly, so we get to inhale it pre-gunk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. For anybody making a selection of a vaporizer, it really comes down to your preferences, right? How much do you value the discreteness? There's a time and a place, for a vape pen that's, nothing else is going to actually fill that need for you. And then how much of an enthusiast are you? Are you concerned about preserving terps? Are you looking for the full kind of a more relaxed, ritualized experience, which some of those will give you? Or are you looking for something that's a little faster and you actually, I don't know about you, but I really don't want to interact with my phone to then control my vaporizer, right? Interact with my phone enough. So
yeah, it does take you out of being present. But I also have to cop to the fact that I've never done that yet. So I look forward to having that opportunity.
There you go. Yeah. So how much is the technology enhancing your experience, or is your technology getting in the way of your experience? Is it becoming part of the focus of your experience or not? To me, an ideal product kind of fades into the background and you don't have to think about it too much.
Right on. Well said. All right, so let's bring an end to this rather long set and go to our commercial break. You are listening to Shaping Fire. Oh, and let me make sure that you come back, because if that was a long set for you, you might be like thinking about taking off. But don't go anywhere, because we're talking about something really important on the third set. We are talking about boiling point myths and the difference between evaporation versus boiling. So make sure you come back from that. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is aerospace engineer Mark Lewis. After you've caught up on the latest Shaping Fire episodes, do you sometimes wish there was more cannabis education available to learn? Well, we got you. Shaping Fire has a fabulous YouTube channel with content not found on the podcast. When I attend conventions to speak or moderate panels, I always record them and bring the content home for you to watch. The Shango Los YouTube channel has world-class speakers including Zoe Sigmund's lecture, Understanding Your Endocannabinoid System, Kevin Jodrey of Wonderland Nursery talking about breeding cannabis for the best terpene profile, Frenchie Canoli's Lost Art of the Hashishin presentation, Nicholas Mahmood on regenerative and polyculture cannabis growing, Dr. Sunil Agrawal on the history of cannabis medicine around the world, Eric Vlosky and Josh Rutherford on solventless extraction, and Jeff Lowenfels on the soil food web. There are several presentations from Dr. Ethan Russo on terpenes and the endocannabinoid system too. While there, be sure to check out the 3 10-part Shaping Fire Sessions series, one with Kevin Jodrey, one with Dr. Ethan Russo, and one with Jeff Lowenfels. And even my own presentations on how to approach finding your dream job in cannabis and why we choose cannabis business even though the risks are so high. As of today, there's over 200 videos that you can check out for free. So go to youtube.com/Shango Los or click on the link in the newsletter. Online cannabis seed distributors often seem to be all the same, but Multiverse Beans constantly works to provide you with cannabis seeds and a buying experience that you won't find elsewhere. Multiverse Beans works directly with the breeders to secure as many packs of your favorites as possible so that they have your favorite beans long after others have sold out. Some shops simply buy breeder minimums, but I get messages all the time from breeders saying some version of Multiverse asked to buy my entire run. At multiversebeans.com, you can find rare cannabis seeds from Night Owl Seeds, including the Dark Owl sublabel, Mephisto Genetics, Square One Genetics, Robin Hood Seeds, and Ethos, and so many others. Multiverse also initiates projects with breeders to secure exclusive packs that you simply won't find elsewhere. Multiverse founder Paul Lal sees himself not only as a curator of the best cannabis seeds available, but also as a collaborator with breeders, trying to bring novel crosses to the market that his customers are asking for. Multiverse Beans also creates exclusive stickers for their popular seed varieties that are available free only when you order those seeds from Multiverse. Check out their stickers like the badass recent slap for Mothman by Gnome Automatics on Instagram at Multiverse Beans. And finally, the freebies. As you'd expect, Paul sends quality freebies with every order. And when you spend at least $150, Multiverse allows you to choose your freebies from their special selections. You can get a 10% discount off regularly priced items when you use the discount code SHAPINGFIRE, all one word, at checkout. Sign up for their mailing list to be eligible for their monthly seed giveaway worth $250. So go to multiversebeans.com now for a buying experience you won't get anywhere else. Sometimes the topics I want to share with you are far too brief for an entire Shaping Fire episode. In those instances, I post them to Instagram. I invite you to follow my 2 Instagram profiles and participate online. The Shaping Fire Instagram has follow-up posts to Shaping Fire episodes, growing and processing best practices, product trials, and, of course, gorgeous flower photos. The Shango Los Instagram follows my travels on cannabis garden tours, my successes and failures in my own garden, insights and best practices from personal grows everywhere, and always gorgeous flower photos. On both profiles, the emphasis is on sharing what I've learned in a way that you can replicate it in your own garden, your own hash lab, or for your own cannabinopathic health. So I encourage you to follow at Shaping Fire and at Shango Los and join our online community on Instagram. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is aerospace engineer Mark Lewis. So here's the big finish. During the first set, we talked about why we vape and what the customer experience is, the consumer experience is, and why so many people are attracted to vaping. During the second set, we went in depth into the vaporizer technologies as they are right now, and a whole bunch of strategies for getting a vape in your hands that fits your smoking preferences, because they really are a personal device. Well, here in set 3, we're going to finish up with a discussion of evaporation versus boiling, because if the primary physics that we want to have happen is the cannabinoids and terpenes and the rest of the resin components to be vaporized and then inhaled into our lungs, it really does matter what their volatility levels are and whether we're evaporating or boiling. And in our scene on Instagram or on Reddit, it's very common to see these little charts that show all of the volatility points for different terpenes and cannabinoids. And we feel like that empowers us. But Mark, you've written this great blog on your website that explains how that belief is not quite right. And then people are using that information and the thermostats on our vaporizers in ways that aren't maybe getting the results that they're looking for. So I guess let's slide into this by talking about these charts that exist and what their limitations are that you see as a engineer.
Yeah. Thanks, Shango. I appreciate that. I'm fascinated by these boiling point charts, and when I first saw them, I was like, "Oh, that's really cool!" And these vaporizers are saying that I can dial in, a particular terpene if I dial it to 349 degrees Fahrenheit, I will get limonene, because that's the boiling point of limonene, and that's just not true. It's the bottom line of that. As you look deeper into it, those may be the boiling points. Boiling points are notoriously difficult to actually measure. So there's boiling ranges. Most scientists use boiling ranges rather than a particular boiling point because it's pressure dependent, and there's other aspects of the purity of the sample and all of these other things that lead to boiling or not boiling. So there's that, but that's not as relevant as the other aspects here. The great thing about the charts is that it gives you some relative volatility of the compound. So by volatility, how easy is it to go from a liquid to a vapor? So something that's super volatile at room temperature will evaporate really rapidly. Think of rubbing alcohol, for example. So that's a pretty volatile compound, whereas water is not a very volatile compound. It takes a little bit more work to get those molecules into their gaseous form. So those boiling point charts are great to understand some relative volatility, but they don't tell the entire story, if you will.
So do they have any value to us as people who are consuming cannabis with vaporizers? Like if there might be some, maybe not inaccuracies in them, but some contextual things that are missing, can they be useful to us at all? How could we use them to our benefit, or is it just not useful?
Yeah, no, they are useful in understanding sort of the relative nature of these different compounds. So what we've got in cannabis is this wonderful bouquet of different aromatics and flavonoids and cannabinoids that are in this mixture. And it's helpful to maybe think about it as a perfume. And in that perfume, there's these top notes that are lighter. They're the citrusy notes. They're if you think about that in terms of a perfume, there's your top notes, your mid notes, and your base notes. Now, if you put on your cologne or your perfume, right away you're getting those earlier notes as part of the mixture. They're more dominant, but you're still getting the base notes and those smells as the perfume evaporates off of you. But the mixture later on, an hour later, is going to maybe be less on the top notes and more dominant with the mid notes, but your base notes are still there as well. And then later on into the evening, a lot of your top notes have all evaporated. Your mid notes, there's less of them, and your base notes then are the dominant smell that you will smell. And similarly, that happens more rapidly with vaporization, particularly flower vaporization, is that you are, for a particular power setting on your vaporizer, you are going to get a different mixture of those compounds, and your second pull will be slightly different. Your third pull will be slightly different. Your fourth pull will be more different. And throughout your session with a particular bowl, you're going to be left then at the end with some of the heavier, more difficult to volatilize compounds, but they'll still be present.
That sounds fun, but also frustrating, right? Because I want all of it at the same time, but my mind suggests that the way that I would get them all at the same time is if I am using a really hot setting, which would then also give me a satisfying cloud, perhaps. But what I'm doing is I'm like wrecking probably the more volatile ones in order to get the more base ones. And even though in my head I'm thinking, oh, if I scorch it at this higher temperature, I'll get all the good stuff at once. That isn't really how it plays out, is it?
Yes and no. I mean, if you crank up the heat, you're going to volatilize more rapidly, right? So you're going to get it's still going to happen in a similar way. Your lighter compounds are going to evaporate more rapidly. It's just going to be on a compressed time scale. And so the benefits of those who choose to do low temperature vaporization is that it spreads out that extraction, if you will, over time. And so you're able to taste and experience the subtleties in a different way. Again, if I have a medical condition that I'm treating and I need that rapid onset, then by all means crank it up.
What would be the temperature you would recommend if somebody's goal is to get as much as they can out of it, tasting uniform in just a hit or two?
Yeah. Well, I would, personally, I'm never
personally, you wouldn't recommend that.
Personally, I wouldn't recommend that. I think you get a lot more out of your cannabis through a lower. I started out there, Shango, when I first started exploring vaporization, and I wanted to ratchet it up to that pre-combustion point, right? So that I had that heavy roast. I felt got the feedback that was more familiar to me, like smoking. And honestly, over the last couple of years, I consistently start dialing it back farther and farther and farther. And it extends my session a little bit, but my enjoyment level goes way up. I don't approach with the bowl. There's a point in your bowl where you start to experience a bite. And that's when I cash out. Mm-hmm. And if you're up in that pre-combustion zone where you're at, temperatures around 400 or greater, you're going to get to that bite a lot faster. Mm-hmm. And to me, then I'm wasting product because I didn't experience all of the joy that the rest of the compounds were offering me.
I think that speaks to a really important point and can probably be like a theme for the show, which is part of choosing to use a vaporizer for your consumption involves having a different experience than combustion, because vaporizing is never going to be combustion. And so part of becoming a regular vaporizer is learning to smoke in new ways. For example, people who are fans of the cold start, where you warm up the tool already loaded, and the dab oil slowly increases, and you're taking hits as it's warming up, working its way all the way up. Your sesh has significantly expanded in the time, and also your every hit that you take is going to be different, but that evolution of the hits is itself a different experience, an enjoyable experience, a connoisseur's experience that you don't get with a joint.
Yeah, it's slowing it down a little bit, which I think we've lost a little bit in our cannabis consumption, right?
Keep the foreplay in cannabis.
I love it. Yeah, well, it's leaning into. I mean, we don't do shots of alcohol anymore after college. I mean, maybe occasionally, but to me, it's more like sipping a fine cocktail or a whiskey rather than slamming it back and not just going after the end result. Again, no judgment, because that was a large part of my life for a while.
And as we've talked about throughout the show, this whole show is about personal preference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're not trying to judge anybody. Yeah,
no, not at all. Not at all. It's just be open-minded to experiencing cannabis differently. And I think that's what vaporization offers you, is this, a really different way to enjoy really high quality cannabis. And I'm blessed, and you're blessed, and others out there are blessed to live in places where they have really conscientious cultivators who are creating these amazing terp-rich varietals that I think deserve to be experienced in their fullest. And for me, flower vaporization is a way for me to taste and experience that complexity that the plant has to offer. And the high is different than combusting.
Well, that's a really great ending to the show there, Mark. I was going to ask you if there are any more boiling point myths that you wanted to point out. And so I am, because you may have something else that you want to bring to the table before we wrap up, but that was beautiful. Do you have any other boiling point myths that you want to bring up before we end the show?
Well, the only real thing is that the mechanism is not really boiling, which is internal to a fluid. It's better to think about it as evaporation, and just a rapid evaporation rather than a boiling.
I see. So the charts that point out the boiling point, they may be scientifically accurate, but really, because evaporation starts before boiling, we're back to you pointing out that it really is more of a range, and it is a range that every time we take a hit, we're going to cool the heating element to some degree. And so we're just going to be, whatever temperature we pick, we're actually just going to be kind of cycling up and down in that general neighborhood.
Yeah, some devices warm up faster and compensate, but largely, yeah, you're doing that kind of cycling back and forth. The boiling points, again, give you the relative how you're going to experience that bowl, I guess.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being a guest on Shaping Fire. I've been a fan of vaporizers for years, and but I've never actually studied them very hard. And as I said in the introduction, when I met you, you had the actual scientific answers for the questions that I had for years. And it was funny because our first phone call was over an hour, and I was so excited to hear you cross applying all this vaporization all these vaporization questions I had to aeronautical engineering and rocket science. I was all like, oh, I have finally found my person for the vaping show. So I really appreciate you coming over and hanging out with us on Shaping Fire for a little while and sharing your expertise, and also kind of taking it out of the heady super science vocabulary that you and I used on our first phone call, and kind of put it in layman's terms today, so that we could do a show that would be open to everybody. So I appreciate your knowledge and your ability to make that knowledge accessible to all sorts of different kind of cannabis enthusiasts.
Well, thank you so much, Shango, and thank you for all that you have done over the years to really educate consumers about this wonderful plant and other plants that are out there. You've been a part of my own educational journey, and your guests have been part of that journey, and I just want to do a shout out to all of those people in the cannabis space who are helping to educate others and to demythify this industry, because the more we can demythify it, the more we can move beyond the stigma and start really celebrating what the plant has to offer us.
Fabulous. All right, dear listener, if you want to learn more from Mark, I highly recommend that you check out his website, where he has got a handful of blog entries that are very interesting, with all sorts of charts and graphs, including the one that we did this last set, primarily focused on boiling point myths, which it goes into far more detail than we did here today. And you can find the blog section at his website, which is pearllabs.com. And so it's spelled specially. So it's PRRLLABS.com. It's kind of like a cat, pearllabs.com. And there you will find, his blog and also the vaporizers that he has, engineered himself, with all of this insight. And I'm a big fan of the Neo that I talked about in the introduction. So at the very least, go check it out, because a vaporizer that functions like a handheld lighter is a pretty cool thing to see. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news, exclusive videos, and giveaways. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. Be sure to follow on Instagram for all original content not found on the podcast. That's at Shaping Fire and at Shango Los on Instagram. Be sure to check out the Shaping Fire YouTube channel for exclusive interviews, farm tours, and cannabis lectures. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.